Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today, I have a special episode for you made up of messages from the listeners of Attendance Bias, you. For several reasons, I always figured that it would be impossible to do an Attendance Bias episode about Coventry because, well, I thought who would be biased in thinking that Coventry was a great show because they were there? Attendance bias is about recognizing the positivity in shows that we've been to, and it's extremely rare that positivity is mentioned in the same sentence as the Coventry Festival, of which we're approaching the 20-year anniversary. It's the same reason that I'm hesitant to host an episode about Big Cypress. The event was just so huge in scale that one guest's experience couldn't possibly encompass it. The same is true for Coventry. It was such a disaster that one guest's experience couldn't get across how poor and unpleasant it was. I know that people had a good time at Coventry, but I think overall it's widely seen as the worst event in Phish history. But a listener and a former guest named Brad Gordon emailed me with a really clever idea. With the 20th anniversary of Coventry coming up this summer, as well as the 4-year anniversary of Attendance Bias, we're also anticipating another Phish festival in August, Mondegreen. What if listeners called in with one positive memory about Coventry? It could be something as big and concrete as having a blast with your friends, or it could be something as abstract as an emotion you felt at some point during the weekend. Your positive memory could be a specific jam, or it could be something as minor as a funny shirt that you saw at the festival. The episode is not meant to whitewash Coventry, as it is as close to a universally poor experience as we're bound to get in the Phish world. But really, the purpose of this episode, as I understood it, is to pick out the little joys of even a bad Phish experience. To put it another way, I have a lot of friends who practice mindfulness, and one of the habits that they've developed is before they go to bed, they write down one positive thing that happened that day. Apparently, it's a practice that helps you realize that there's nothing that can be all bad, even if, like at Coventry, the band completely blotches Glide beyond belief. So I took Brad's advice and I opened a number on Google Voice. People called in, they recorded their big, their little, and their somewhere in between positive experiences from that disastrous weekend in August 2004. So what follows is a compilation of the positive moments of Coventry 20 years ago, as remembered by the listeners of Attendance Bias. I'll share mine at the very end of the episode. But first, I'd like to thank everybody who called in to share their memories and to thank everybody for listening. So enjoy Coventry 20 years later.
Hey, Brian, it's Bradley in Houston. But as you know from our years of knowing each other, that I have a few memories from Coventry. As I was living in Nashville at the time, I was fortunate enough to be part of the crew that was contracted from there to staff just personnel on site due to the owner of the company's relationships longstanding with Phish and Phish management. So I'd arrived there a few days before the show, before any customer or any ticket holders were on site, and was there for all the rains until night one. And the really special memory I have was being there as part of the safety team on a gator on the road in between the venue and the airport when the sun came out and the rains had finally stopped. And we were there just kind of making sure people had water and everybody was enjoying themselves now that there seemed to be a little bit of a break in the weather. And all of a sudden we saw a few hikers with backpacks and their coolers and camping gear hiking along the road. And then there was a few more hikers, and then a few more hikers, and a few more hikers. And we were talking to some of these early folks who had walked there. And they were telling us that they had hiked for a few miles. And then we talked to a few more. And soon it was thousands of hikers who had hiked well more than 20, 25 miles to get to the venue because Mike had announced that they weren't going to be able to let any more vehicles on site. We all know what a mess the airport was and how things had kind of got thrown into chaos. But it was a really special thing seeing all these Phish fans, just a stream of them. It started as a trickle, And then before long, it was a deluge of thousands of fans who were so determined to be there for that last show. And I'll never forget that moment. And it was a very poignant, touching fish memory that I hold and cherish as an experience I'll never forget. Hope you're well, man. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Right. So, okay, Coventry was a whole mess, right? So we drove up and couldn't, like, Mike said, "Ugh, it's over, get out of here." And, like, we didn't know what to do. So we stopped at a local, like, tire shop, and these fools drove us in there and gave us their like, this is like when pagers were the whole jam, right? Nobody really had, like, cell phones. So the guy's like, "I'll come and pick you up after the concert." Just beautiful human beings out there in the worst scenario ever. You know, and like everybody knows, what do you say? What's the last fucking song of Fish is ever going to play? Of course it's The Curtain. All right, there he goes. That's my 2 cents.
Hi, my name is Kevin. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. One thing I'll always remember, I was 15 when I went to Coventry, and I flew from Madison, Wisconsin. It was one of my first times flying alone. And I was flying into Portland, Maine from Madison, and they had to reroute us into Boston, land in Boston because of the weather. And we got on a bus that United had chartered, kind of drove through the night. Everyone was sleeping. I remember they stopped the bus in like the middle of the drive, in the middle of nowhere, at some bus depot, and made everyone get off the bus, and then had everyone buy a bus ticket because United had not paid their bills to this bus company. So I remember a lot of very nice people coming up to me, a little 15-year-old kid, being like, "Oh, do you have enough money to, you know," we're in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, to get to Portland. And after that, it was just bliss. It was actually only my second Fish conference, was Coventry. And, it was fantastic. It was one of the best times of my life. And I remember the mud, and also having a weird feeling of like, is this how every Fish concert is? Like, you know, a foot of mud and people having a great time. And it was awesome. So that's my story. Bye.
Hey, Brian, it's your pal and former guest, Scotty King here, coming to you from London, Ontario, Canada. I just wanted to share my positive Coventry story. So we had entered into the lineup and made it off the highway, but we were on like a countryside road moving our way when we first hit the traffic. Almost immediately had just flashbacks of the 16-hour ordeal that we had gone through the summer before it hit. But we were settled in and traffic was moving, albeit slowly. And then it simply wasn't. And then it was dark, and once again, we were dead stopped on a country road somewhere. So either way, at that time, my girlfriend and my wife now, and my friend's girlfriend decided to go for a walk and maybe seek answers or solutions. We were surprised when they returned, but a short half an hour, 45 minutes later, saying that a farmer couple had offered us a place to stay to camp in their yard overnight. Not yet knowing the situation on the ground at Coventry and not having heard the mic announcement, it seemed like a good idea for us to camp and then go further in the morning rather than another sleepless night on the road. And as it also turns out, this couple knew the state trooper who was parked at the intersection ahead, who gave us a personal escort directly to the farm. I can still see the dejected and angry faces of the people we passed on the road as we were with a couple of clicks up the road where we met Ed and Patty Rakowski. Their daughters had just left for university, and seeing our girlfriends at the time reminded them of their daughters, so they made us a gracious offer. They welcomed us, and they let us set up our tents for the night. In the morning, we had the bunny on. When we heard the fateful announcement from Mike about not letting cars in and so on, we were very happy to have a beautiful view of the Vermont countryside and a nice, safe place for our tents as we made and discussed our next move. Our hosts were gracious enough to actually ATV us into the festival site on the first day. I think on the second day we hopped in the back of the truck, but either way, both nights we had a nice, safe and pleasant place to stay out of the mud. We got to enjoy the music of the festival such as it was. We even remembered to pack our rubber boots. So that's my happy Coventry. Thanks to this day to Ed and Patty, and to my good friend Sean Taylor for helping me recall some of the details on this one. He is still in touch with Ed and Patty to this day. Bye.
Yeah, I'm calling with a Coventry story. Coventry happened after my freshman year of college. And so group of friends, we actually took my sister's car, and didn't mention it, drove out from Colorado to Vermont. And like everybody else, we got stuck in a multi-day line of traffic. And we were in like some remote area of Vermont and sitting in a line of traffic. And, I'm a wanderer and like to socialize. So I got out of the car and started walking along and just talking to people in the line. And I don't know, I must have walked at least a mile or two because the cars weren't going anywhere. And, then a little trickle of rain. So I started heading back to the car. Unbeknownst to me, at the same time, one of the girls we were with got some insider information from so one of the locals, and they said that staying in this line was just not going to translate. You just weren't going to get in. So at the same time that I'm walking and then jogging and running back to the car, my crew is, flipping around and rerouting to a different road. And, about this time, the rain really started coming down. And so I'm in a sprint back to the car barefoot. And by chance, I happened to come up on one of my friends who was out looking for me and hopped in the car, at the very last minute. Like I would have been lost. This is day of flip phones, but there's no cell phone coverage. I don't even think we texted at this point. And so I got in the car and, then we were still in a line for the rest of the night. And, the show is what it is. We were young enough. I got to a couple 1.0 shows and then a couple 2.0 shows, that I was just stoked to be there. I don't think I was, so spun, and I don't think I really had a pulse or high standards for like the quality of music. But one thing I do remember is on the first day we go into the festival, we're a little late and we're towards the back, and they go into Runaway Gym, and there's limited dry standing space, and to hell with it. We see this big old open space of mud, and as they drop into Runaway Gym, we all just, as our crew, maybe half a dozen to a dozen of us, just make our way over to this mud and are just dancing wildly in piles of mud. Yes, the music, upon re-listening to it, is about as bad of a show as I've ever had. But, there's some aspects of that trip that were really formative for my group of friends. And there are some peak moments that stand out in my mind of, an era when some of my closest friends, we did this epic journey from Colorado to Vermont. And we were just living up life and enjoying what we thought was the end of an era. And have since gone to many, many more shows and enjoyed much better music. But still, some of those memories from Coventry stand out as peak fish memories for myself and my group of friends.
Hey, Brian, this is Matt Hoffman from outside of Philly. And my good memory from Coventry is I was there with a group of buddies. A lot of them all went to high school together. I didn't go with them, but was a college friend of mine and love these guys. And there's this one guy, Bob, who they'd always say is like a dog, where he would get lost at every show and miraculously somehow find everybody at some point during the night. And I remember it was rainy and muddy and a mess, and I didn't even know where the hell we were camped, but I was just set up with everybody, and son of a bitch, Bob just shows up. We hadn't seen the guy in hours. He's just got some sort of, bloodhound-like nose or something like that. But that's one of my favorite memories from Coventry.
Hey, Brian, it's Libby, and my positive Coventry memory is that I met two of my best friends there. Now some of my best friends in the Ben and Jerry's line. I said, hey, are you Iculus the Prophet and are you Mary Prankster? And it was Jim and Mary, who I knew just from the Rhombus fish chat forum. And I went on to be a bridesmaid in their wedding. Their daughter is my goddaughter. And Coventry wasn't all that bad. Cheers.
Hey, it's Sean from Bayfield, Canada calling. My top memory, although I do actually have many more than some of the folks that are posting in the thread, is wandering off between sets on Saturday in search of a little bit of food when I found the pizza vendor at the back near the entrance to the concert field. I believe it was underneath a Ferris wheel and near some kind of rock installation. Anyways, I had more money in my pocket than I would normally have at a festival at that point and decided to buy 2 full pies. I brought those pies back through the crowd, stumbling a little bit in the mud and amidst the people. And at one point, a couple of folks even steadied me and grabbed the pizzas so that they didn't tumble into the mud. When I got back to my group of 6 and presented 2 full, warm pizzas, you'd think I had delivered the world's greatest gift. I know it was only pizza, but it was warm and it was something communal that we shared. And damn if it wasn't delicious. Anyways, had lots of fun, stayed off site, made our way. We were vets, and we made the best of the whole thing. But what I remember most and the happiest moment was definitely that pizza. Cheers.
Hey, what's going on? This is JD originally from Long Island, New York, and now in New Hampshire. I had a few good memories of Coventry. Overall, yes, it was shit. I made it in. So that right there is a positive. But the one thing that I will say that I think is probably my favorite memory is that after dozens and dozens of fish shows, me expecting that one to be my last, I finally got my first pollock. That's right. I was happy about getting the poster. It is still hanging in my house, and I look at it every day, and I love it. So if there's one thing I can think of that was positive, that was it. Me thinking about getting my first and only pollock, I've gotten many more since then, but I would have to say that probably is my favorite.
Hey man, dude, Coventry was not the greatest, but the journey getting there was awesome. Believe it or not, being stuck on I-91 on the way up there for 2 nights. I think my friends and I left southern New Hampshire Thursday, hit traffic Thursday afternoon, hung out all day on the freeway Friday and Friday night, and then Saturday morning they came on and were like, y'all have to turn around. We were like, no, if there was a place, we're just going to park our cars on the side of the road. If there's a place for them to tow all the cars, that's where they could have the festival. So I always thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, just that we turned I-91 into Shakedown Street for 48 hours. It was awesome. This is Casey in New Hampshire.
Hey, me and my friends went to Coventry at that point in life. Half of us had moved out to Seattle and they came in for it, so it was a big deal. But of course, it was like half of their weekend, and you know how the bad traffic was and everything. Anyways, long story short, we got in there, blah blah blah. But then we friends as a group decided to leave and hit the first rest area, you know, so we could listen to it there, and then also to get out of there and not be stuck in 4 days of traffic. So our friends could see their family and stuff, and it was kind of bittersweet, but it was sort of like we accepted it, and it was, I don't know, I look back fondly sitting around that parking. I think about that set at the rest area with about 50 other fans that had the same idea, listening to what we thought would be the last set ever. Better memories than, you know, the whole trying to get in there and everything was rough. Anyways, see you at Monday Green, dudes.
Hey, this is Josh from Baltimore. One positive thing, actually there were a few positive things that I do remember from Coventry. There were absolutely some musical highlights despite some sloppy play. The Gotta Jaboo on the first day was an absolute rager, and I'm sure most people know about the Split Open and Melt that they played, the 31-minute monster that they played to blow off some steam, as the band said before they played it. One of the other positives was the storytelling, and they kind of gave us an inside look at how and where and why some of the songs were written. Songs like David Bowie, The Wolfman's Brother turned out to be Fishman, The Curtain With, and it was interesting to hear some of those stories. The Dickie Scotland song for Richard Glasgow. So there were some interesting nuggets that we got despite the overall negative tenor of the vibe because it was the last couple of shows. Thanks, Brian. Keep up the great work.
Hey there. In response to Coventry, one good story. I would put it this way. I left my house roughly 36 hours before Friday. I live in Northwest PA. Obviously, Newport, Vermont is 10 plus hour drive. At that point, I mean, my first Phish show was in 1992. And, you know, I went up to those shows with not only my brother, my real brother, but also my brother from another, who the three of us had seen many shows together. And, you know, we actually didn't go to any other shows that year. We decided we were going to do the finale, basically. So, you know, we actually went a different way than everybody else that was on tour. We went up to almost Canada through Plattsburgh, right through the Clifford Ball, and kind of cut down. And I don't know, we ended up in line sometime late Thursday into Friday. The mud and all that, you know, it was holding us back, kept us in line. But truth be told, while we were sitting in our truck, you know, reflecting on all the stuff we've done, there was nothing but kind of camaraderie and good times kind of thing. And, you know, we eventually were in the luckies that got in. We had a muddy site, you know, we bought hay. We heard Mike tell everybody it was shut down, and we watched a parade of people with their camping gear destined to make the shows. And not only that, I mean, you can't look upon that kind of dedication in a bad way. You know, we hung out with our buddies. I hung out in boxers. These guys got mad because I might have been balls out at some time. But the reality is, in spite of something that, I don't know if deep down we knew it was going to be over per se. I mean, I remember walking out after the curtain and that final show, We brought in some Jägermeister, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to let these guys bring me down on this. And like everybody, when we got to that waiting in the Velvet Sea, I cried just like everybody else. I was almost like I'm fighting the tears of, sorry, I got long there and it cut me off. I'll keep it short. Here's the thing, in spite of everything, not only did putting blackberries into my Long Trail beer be something that I took home. So there's a positive right there. Putting those blackberries into beer, something I did for quite a few years after that. But the fact when we were leaving, the buses kind of rolled by us, and I remember thinking, man, see you guys in probably 5 years, I think is what we said when we were leaving. Because, although we weren't sure whether or not this was the end or whatever, I don't know. I think deep down, after all the years I'd already spent with these guys, that I don't know. There was no way that this train was done. So I'm grateful to where we are. I'm grateful to where I am. I'm grateful for all the stuff I've experienced with those guys. There's no doubt about that. Looking forward to Mondegreen, and but I guess if there's one takeaway, maybe it is those blackberries and that Long Trail beer. So peace out, yo.
Hey, this is Tim from St. Simons Island, Georgia. The fondest memory I have from Coventry would have to be the camaraderie. We didn't know, or we thought this would be the last time we'd all be able to be together and dance to the tunes of Fish. I had some friends that bailed out on me last moment, so I ended up going up by myself. I believe I met some folks. I think I had a layover in Philadelphia before we went up there, and I met a crew of people. They were nice enough to let me ride with them in their rental car all the way up there until we got caught into the traffic, and we ended up, parking on the side of the road and hiking in 12 miles. But certainly the camaraderie amongst everybody there was awesome. Something I'll never forget. But appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say the people at Ladou's Auto Service were the most kind and generous people I've ever seen. And they fed us, gave us alcohol, and were just generally sweet and nice and kind people. Shout out to Ladou's. Later.
Hey, this is David Lowy in San Diego, and I wanted to say the one positive thing from Coventry, after having walked for however many miles and hours to get there, and plus, as an added bonus, I had just had my appendix out, so I was kind of like the walking wounded. The way fishermen thanked us for walking was like so heartfelt, and it hits me in the feels every time I think of it.
Hey man, Sean Faust from New Jersey here. We drove up to Coventry. We got stuck in traffic about 18 miles from the entrance, and we were stuck to the right. We were watching the left laners going by, and even on the bunny they were like, "Oh, you left laners." And sadly for us, we did not get in, and we drove home. But then I saw online that all these people like ditched their cars and walked in, and it moved me so much. And like for a negative experience, it just made it positive, and it inspired my song Inside again. You might have heard it, you might not have, probably not, because who am I? I'm just regular old Sean. This is a stupid message, but I'm still finishing it. But to see everybody just say, no, we're going to the show, we're going to go to the show, we're going to be at the show, and just walk all those miles, man, talk about being inspiring to a guy who ended up driving home to New Jersey after waiting probably a day and a half in the right lane. But man, all you people that left your cars and walked to Coventry to experience that 3 days, I envy you, I salute you, I bow to you, and most importantly, I love you. Peace.
Hey, Brian, this is Don from Westchester, New York. I heard you put a call out there for some stories about Coventry, and actually positive stories. That might be a little tougher, but there is one that comes to mind. There's nothing major. It's just kind of a fun thing that I got a kick out of. Maybe you and the rest of the listeners will also. I remember on the way out there was a giant billboard, and it said something to the effect of, hey fans, let Mike know what you thought. And it left a phone number on there. So, we were under the impression that Fish put that up there and they're going to, let you patch through and leave a message for Mike and tell a good story or something. Well, it turns out it seems like it was just a bunch of buddies that put their best friend's cell phone on there. So it was like a prank amongst friends where this one guy just got bombed with phone calls from a bunch of people from the festival. So I'm sure he got a kick out of that, but it was pretty funny. All in all, it's a good memory. I'm glad I went, even though it was a rough time, but it was an important time in the history of the band. Thanks for all you do, Brian. Take care.
Hey, Brian. It's Chris Casey, and I'm calling to give you a little update on what went down to Coventry. So, unlike most people, my crew rolled up there super early, and we ended up in the day parking lot before they even opened the gates. So we had to wait there for 2-3 hours. Then they opened the main gates, and we were able to roll in. And that still took us like 2.5 hours to get my car finally towed in by a tractor to the middle of the muddy field. But once we were there, both my crews of people, I had the people I drove up with and my friends from town where I was living, they were all set up super close to each other. So that was a really good bonus because I was just bouncing back and forth between the tents. The crew that I rolled up with brought power generators and all their DJ equipment. So they were spinning records after the show well into the late night. So that was a scene. And while that was happening, especially on the very last night after the whole thing was over, me and my friend Scott had one of those little two-wheeler dollies, and we were just going up and down the airstrip, giving people rides on that thing, basically till the sun came back up. That was an outstanding time. I can't tell you a thing about the music other than Paige was crying and it was super sloppy. And I hope I never see a performance like that again. But there were good times had. Oh, and when I was leaving, I'm in traffic getting on the highway. Somebody sprints up to my car from the exit where people were trying to hitch rides. And this dude's banging on my window. Turns out it's a guy I know from town who just needed a ride back. And, so I had someone to drive back with the entire way instead of doing it by myself. So that's my recollection of Coventry, and there you have it. Bye.
Hi, it's Brian with the Attendance Bias. Hopefully this is the Coventry hotline. This is long time, first time from Western Mass calling in, thinking a lot about the Coventry. I was going to talk about the party on the side of the road for 2 days and the bunny, even the state troopers, how awesome they were, right before we were getting ready to get off the exit. The kid got dropped off at hitchhike, and then he freaked out because he lost his wallet was in the car of some stranger, and the trooper immediately said, "Come on, let's get him," and when took off, and I presume they got it, his tickets, his flight home, all that stuff. Even, we got in with our cars, but seeing everyone walk and desert the cars after they said go home, I just started thinking, man, how much love, what a great scene. And, actually getting in the show, the festival was some of the best parts, but the more and more I keep thinking about it, I think it's the, such an emotional time when I think about that. I think of love and loss and having to let them go. And then they came back. And so even now, today, doing the Great Woods run, doing the Bethel run, because I'm able to tap into that emotion of something I loved and letting it go. Because of the sour, the sweet is so much sweeter now. And so to me, that's my one good thing is we saw them at their worst, saw it collapse, saw them, had to let them go. And with that as the background, as the gauge, everything we have now, every show is a blessing. That's my good thing. So hopefully this got to Brian. Love the episodes. Keep it up, man. And thanks for doing this. I think Coventry gets a bad rap, but I certainly still have heavy emotional memories, a lot of good ones. And I think it's good that you can have people talk about it and remind them. Anyways, we're going to take care, bro.
Hi, this is Sharon calling from Burlington, Vermont. Somebody forwarded me the number to call about sharing one positive memory from Coventry. So I am calling because the Coventry shows were my very first shows of seeing fish. I had just started dating a guy who I am still with 20 years later, but at the time we had just started dating. He was really into fish, and he convinced me to go, and we spent like 20 hours in traffic together, which was a crazy thing to do as a new couple. And he brought this guy that he had been living with, one of his roommates, who was like really going through some shit. He was in the car with us for parts of the time, but then he would just like leave the car and disappear for hours and come back. The traffic was wild. I had never experienced anything like that. And then going to the festival, I had never experienced anything like that either. And I know that everyone was really, really sad, but as somebody that was seeing all of this and hearing it and experiencing it for the first time, I was having a totally different reaction. And here we are 20 years later, and I'm gearing up to go to Mondegreen, and I've seen almost 100 shows since then. So just wanted to leave this message, and I hope whoever is on the other line or the other end of this Google voice is having a good day. Okay, bye.
And that's it for the Attendance Bias listeners' positive memories of Coventry. So I just want to be clear, I'm not trying to whitewash Coventry. I do think it was the worst fish experience ever, in the same sense that Big Cypress was the best fish experience ever. But I'm trying to put some little stock into this idea that nothing can be all bad, that 20 years after the event, there are still little positive memories that could stick out in our memories, and it's worth it to share it. So that said, I have two big positive memories of Coventry. One is pretty abstract, and the other one is more concrete and more relatable, at least I think so. I'll start with the abstract one. My friend Craig and I were together for the weekend, the whole festival, and in the middle of the curtain, which Trey came on, or the band came on and started playing, and then stopped right in the middle of it and said it was played in the wrong key, we want to start it over again. Craig and I kind of looked at each other and agreed we had had enough. It was time. We'd put up with enough. Let's start making our way slowly to the car. We could still hear the music, but we didn't really care to hear it. So I remember thinking the positive part of all that is that I was glad that it was over. And when I say it, I mean the narrative of Fish. Like, I was and I am so obsessed with the narrative of Fish, the story and the lore of the band, that it was a relief that the story was now complete. It wasn't a happy ending, but the uncertainty of that summer 2004 tour, where the playing was uneven at best, it was disorienting to me as a fan. We all hoped for a happy ending, and really it couldn't have gone worse, but at least it was an ending. For better or worse, our collective story, the Fish story, had an ending, and that part was positive to me. I was an English major at the time. I was writing or hoping to be a professional writer. That didn't happen. But at the time, I was really obsessed with telling the truth in a narrative way. And with Coventry, it was the truth, and it was over, and it was a negative truth, but at least it was a full story, complete. Of course, 5 years later, that would change, but at the time, it felt that was a positive feeling. The more concrete positive memory was the drive home and when we actually got there. So Craig volunteered to drive home to Long Island straight from the festival. As I check on Google Maps right now, it's about a 7-hour drive. So as we started the drive, we saw cars on the side of the road for miles and miles, this unending line of cars from the people who pulled over and hiked it in. I drifted off to sleep. My only job as the shotgun rider was to change CDs whenever the previous album was finished. We started driving out with Dark Side of the Moon. It was late, we were exhausted, and I thought that it was a good way to kind of start our drive. But after I fell asleep, I would kind of wake up, I would drift in and out of sleeping. I found it hilarious that when I would wake up, I would drift in and out. Every time I woke up, different segments of Dark Side of the Moon would be playing. It was obvious that Craig was listening to it on a loop. This album is just like 40 minutes long, and the drive was 7 hours. Craig didn't want to wake me up. He's a sweetheart. He didn't want to wake me up just to change the music, so he must have listened to that album at least 6 or 7 consecutive times. I thought that was hysterical. And finally, before he dropped me off at my house, we stopped for pancakes at the East Bay Diner on Sunrise Highway in Merrick, New York. The sun was just coming up, and we were both silent. As the waitress served the pancakes to our table, I remember Craig staring just straight ahead, the 1,000-yard stare, a true shock. We had barely slept for a week. We went from New York to Great Woods to Camden to Coventry and then home again, something I don't think I could do if you paid me $1 million today. We were both physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted, and before we even grabbed the syrup for the pancakes, I just remember Craig, he didn't even blink. He said very softly, "That was not a great fish show." And I just exploded in laughter. I could not stop. There wasn't a lot of people in the diner, so people didn't really turn around and look at me, but it was a true belly laugh. I truly grabbed my stomach and laughed and laughed and laughed to hear him say, "That was not a great fish show." It was the understatement of the decade. Like, I laughed, I couldn't stop. Like, no shit, it was the worst fish show ever, and it still is. So to wrap it all up as not a great fish show, as if you'd been thinking about that for 7 hours, it was the funniest thing, and it really did put a positive bow on a hellish week of the last fish tour ever, at least as we thought so at the time. So that's it for the positive memories of Coventry. I'd like to put it out there and thank you to every single person who called in and left a message to prove that, number one, the best episodes of Attendance Bias are the ones where the fans call in and tell their story. And also, I'd like to thank you for, even through this harsh, ugly 20 years ago weekend, that you could all at least find one positive memory to share. So thank you so much to everyone who called in, and thank you to everyone who's listening. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'd like to thank every single person who called in to share their memory. And if you enjoy Attendance Bias, support the show. You can leave a rating or a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You can also go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and leave a donation, anything that you could spare to keep this podcast going. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.